Looking for some inspiration? You've come to the right show. Step into your divine feminine energy with me as I spill the tea on leadership and life. Hi, I'm Tracy M., your host here on Brave Girls, and I've got your back, and no mean girls are allowed. I've been called the fairy godmother of storytelling, and my gift is to unearth people's stories, share them, and make the world a better place for all of us. So sit back, relax, and listen in as we send some more positive vibes out into the universe. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Brave Girls with Tracy M podcast. I'm super excited for this episode of Listen Up with my good friend Linda Foy, who has a background in journalism, public relations, consulting, and she has agreed to be here with us to share her perspective and what she has learned as a brave girl out there in the corporate world, in the journalistic world, in the broadcast world, and now in sort of the new season of life. So welcome to the show, Linda.
Thank you so much. It is so good to see you, Tracy.
Oh, it's so good to see you. So just for our listeners, I sat next to Linda Foy for about 5 years. I've worked with her for many years. But even before that, I was a fangirl when she was on the radio. And I know I always embarrass her when I say that, but like I loved her reporting on a local AM radio station here in Baltimore, WBAL radio. And I always would listen to what Linda Foy had to say when she was on air. And then when she came and was working side by side with me, I was just so excited to finally meet her and to learn from her and all of her experience as a journalist, sort of as she transitioned into PR. So tell us a little bit about how you even got into broadcast journalism, what you learned there, and then how you translated that into sort of being a spokesperson for a corporation.
Well, so glad to be here. I will try to make this brief. This story can go really long or it can go really short. So we're going to try to be someplace in the middle. So I went to Towson. It was Towson State University way back in the olden days when I went. Majored in mass communication, not with any particular idea of what I would actually do with that. But around my junior year, I realized I really enjoyed the broadcasting classes that we were taking. And I thought, oh, well, this might be fun. I feel like I could do this. And I enjoyed it. And right out of college, I went to a station that at the time was the #1 top 40 station, which was unheard of because, you know, throughout college, your teachers tell you if you want to be a reporter, you're going to have to start at a small market and work your way up. And so I didn't even consider that I would start my broadcasting career in Baltimore. It never even occurred to me, but because of the relationship that I had, just through a course that I took at Towson, we got to go and watch this radio station had a music video program that they hosted. If anybody Google music video, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, and I got to meet the person who hosted it. And just called him to interview him for a paper for another class. And in the course of that interview, he asked me if I would be interested in a position in public affairs. I didn't even know what public affairs was. I think we learned radio and TV production, advertising, and public relations. Public affairs wasn't even a term that I knew. But of course, you don't tell the person at the #1 top 40 station who asks if you're interested in a job that you don't know what he's talking about. So I said, yeah, sure, I'm interested. And one thing led to another. I ended up starting at that station right out of college. It was the lowest level on-air position there was, and it was the lowest paying, but I would have done it for free because it was such an experience to learn alongside professionals who had been in the business for years. Did that for 3 years. And then that's when I went over to BAL. And again, you'll hear me say a lot about how important relationships are. So I got that first job from talking to this guy, interviewing him. He told me about this position. Then I met other reporters because I would go out and cover stories. And one of the reporters I met worked at WBAL. He called me, left a message. I didn't know what he wanted. I probably didn't call him back for a couple weeks. When I finally called him back, he told me about a position they had open. And because it was a news talk station, of course, they put more money into news. They put more effort into, finding good, capable, professional people. And so I interviewed for that job, ended up going there and stayed there for about 12 years. All along, I wanted this I always wanted to live and work in Los Angeles in radio. I went there in 1985 as a college senior, and that was something that just kept gnawing at me no matter where I was and what work I was doing. I was enjoying my work, but that was just one of those like bucket list things that I just felt like I needed to do. I didn't want to wait until, I was about to die to do it. So, anyway, I finally just bit the bullet after 12 years there. I just thought, you know what, if I'm ever going to do this, I'm going to do it now. And so I left BAL, moved to Los Angeles, worked there as a freelancer for a couple of radio stations. And that actually is how I ended up pivoting into public relations and corporate communications. Because when I came back to Maryland, I knew I didn't want to do radio anymore. That the Los Angeles experience was sort of the ultimate experience for me as a broadcaster. I didn't want to do anything else. I had accomplished everything I wanted to do. And so that's how I started looking into PR. And again, back to the relationships, reached out to someone who was in communications reached out to a number of people in communications in different organizations in Maryland because I knew I wanted to come back to Maryland. And one of the people was at the time, Constellation Energy, which then was BGE's parent company. And she put me
the local utility, right?
Local utility. She put me in touch with the folks who were, in the hiring manager, and one thing led to another, and I ended up there. And for the most part, through various mergers and separations and whatnot, I would stay there for 21 years. And then I chose to retire in 2023. So about 2 years ago.
Right.
That's
Right.
mid-sized version of the story.
Yeah. Well, I think I love that you kind of had this like feeling of like I'm supposed to go to LA, like not even really knowing what that was or how you were going to make it work, and you just, it's sort of like you took that leap of like now or never, right? Because you could have probably stayed at BAL until you retired if that's where you were comfortable, but when you were out in LA, because that's a much bigger market, what was the difference in that? And for listeners who aren't really familiar with the media landscape, there's, as Linda said, normally when you get out of college, you go to like Wichita, Kansas, or someplace in the middle of nowhere, and you're the on-air person. And Baltimore's sort of that mid-tier, but LA is sort of like you've reached the pinnacle. If you're like New York, LA, or Atlanta, Chicago, like that's sort of the big time.
So because I said, again, I went my very first trip to LA. I was 20 years old. It was the summer before my final semester at Towson. And it was just a place I'd always wanted to go to. And so I, knew that I wanted to work there. Over the years, I just built relationships. I just started reaching out to news directors at the news talk stations there. I went to conferences, the broadcasting conferences, and I introduced myself. And I had a really good relationship with the news director at the station where I worked most of the time. I worked at a couple of places, but at some point, he finally said to me, if you want to do this, you just need to move here. He said, for the most part, we're not hiring people and moving them out here. There's enough freelancers that we don't need to do that unless you're, the top tier, morning drive host or something like that. That's the way that you're going to do it. And because I had an established relationship with him, and I sent them back then. You sent audition tapes on cassette. I had sent him a number of tapes, and he knew. And the station I worked for in Baltimore, its reputation was known. So, all of that helped me. And finally, I just decided to go out. And as it turned out, the person who I built this relationship with, the strongest relationship. I knew other people, but this was the news director who said, if you move out here, I will give you enough work to make a living. You will not starve. You will not have to struggle. And so he was kind of my best shot. As it turned out, when I moved out there, two things happened. I called him and told him I had moved and I was there, and I was probably going to be ready to start working in a couple of weeks because I wanted to just kind of enjoy myself for a while. And this was in 2001, which is important. And so he looked at his calendar and he said, well, let me see when I've got some time to meet with you, because we still had to go through the process. And he said, what if you come in on Tuesday, September 11th?
Wow.
No problem. This is August, late August. So who knew? And so naturally 2000, 9/11, 2001 happened. And then I was struck with, do I just not show up? This is the biggest story, and certainly in my lifetime. But I can't just not show up, but then do I look stupid showing up, knowing
Right.
what's going on? So I didn't know what to do. So I just thought I can't just not show up. So I called him and I talked to his assistant, and she said, yeah, today's probably not the best day, but she rescheduled me for that Friday. So I went in and we met on Friday. So it all worked out, but it was just one of those things where I just thought, of all the days we could have chosen for me to come in and do this interview, that was the day he pulled out of his hat. So so I knew that I wanted to work in a bigger market than Baltimore at some point. I knew I did not want to work in New York because it's cold. I love New York. I have family there. I visit New York often, but I just didn't want to live there. And I didn't really want to live in Chicago. It is also cold. And Los Angeles was the perfect place for me. I just knew I wanted to be in, a top 5 market, but I wanted to have good weather. And, there were days in January where as a freelancer, you would get called. There were some weeks where I knew I was working a particular shift the whole week because somebody was on vacation. There were other times where they would just call you and ask if you could come in. And then I worked at a public radio station in Pasadena on the weekend. So, there were days in January where I would get a call from the news director at the primary station, which was the CBS owned and operated station, and he would ask me to work, and I would say no because I was going to the beach that day. And I remember being on the beach in January, turning down a day's work just because I could. So, it was just it was only for a year of my life, but it was truly a pivotal time for me because it is what created the shift into a new career, but it also was one of those things where I had to prove to myself that I could do it because as much as I did well at BAL, and I enjoyed my time there. There were many people who thought that I should be grateful for where I was and not
Mhm.
try to do any more. And some of them said it almost that way. So it was one of those things, and I know that some of them laughed when I decided to leave. And I believe some of them thought that when I decided to come back, it was because of some sort of failure.
Like it didn't work out. Yeah, 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 yeah.
And it absolutely did. I did grow tired of it. So for context, my grandmother passed away 2 weeks before I moved out there. She had been sick, and we knew, we weren't surprised, but still, I lost my grandmother. I'm very close to my family. My mom was devastated because her mom had passed, and then her daughter is moving 3,000 miles away. And then 9/11 happened. And like every story I was doing was about how LA was going to be the next target, or, it was all 9/11
Right.
related. And just kind of that combination of things, it made me realize that, you know what? I don't think I want to be here for as long as I thought I would. And I really only thought I would be there maybe 5 years. I never thought I'd be there forever. So I ended up being there for about a year, and I came back and ended up on the corp com side. I freelanced back at my old station in Baltimore and also at a station in DC for a couple months, I think, when I moved back, and then
Right.
ended up at Constellation and then Baltimore Gas and Electric.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Do you feel like, what do you feel like for a reporter is sort of like the most important skill set? Like, because I feel like it's a little bit different when you're a reporter because I don't know, I took a journalism class in college and the main thing that I walked away from that is your role as a journalist is to get every side of the story. Right. When you're in public relations for a corporation, you are transmitting to the world their perspective only. And you're trying to, keep those other like people who are against your message out of the picture and to, amplify your message. So, like, as a reporter, how do you do that? Like,
Yeah. So I will say that it wasn't until I transitioned to the corporate communication side that I appreciated as much as I do now what public relations and corporate communications people do. I was sort of, tunnel vision. I'm the reporter. I've got to get my story, the who, what, where, and, when and
Right.
why. But I saw if it's a story that involves a big organization, a police department, a public utility, some major organization, or even a small one, but particularly the large ones, I saw them as, just give me your soundbite and I'll put it into the story as part of the overall picture. And once I got over to the corporate communications side, I realized what many reporters do is they'll get all of the other people, all the other organizations, particularly if it's a people story. So let's, something horrible has happened to somebody and they're telling
Right.
a story about how awful this thing is and, who's responsible. And the reporters see and this was the impression I got when I moved over to corporate communications, saw the company spokesperson as just a check the box. Let's hear what they have to say. The story is usually almost already completed. They just want to
Mm-hmm.
drop in the soundbite from the report from the organization. And so
Right.
many times, I would get a call at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a media call about some story about some customer or some issue that I knew nothing about. And they would
Mm-hmm.
a right away response because they're going to do this story at 5 o'clock. Well, that's not fair to the organization because we can't possibly, we in the communications department can't possibly know, every single thing that's going on out in the public space that every customer may potentially talk about. So now I need
Right.
to look into it and figure out exactly what happened and then sift through what actually happened and decide what I can legally and ethically and, accurately say. So
Mm-hmm.
so to answer your question, I think one of the things that would be helpful for reporters, and it's so hard to even say this because I know they're on all kinds of deadlines, and reporting now is nowhere near what it was like, 25 years ago when I did it because they're doing stuff on social and they've got a lot going on too. But you know, come into a story with an open mind. Don't come up with your own narrative and try to make the story fit. I've had reporters tell me or ask me a question, the same question multiple ways because they want me to say something that they've already determined is what the spokesperson ought to say. And I would not say what they wanted me to say. And I had a particular reporter who actually said to me, "Here is what I need you to say," and proceed to tell me what he needed me to say. And I said, "Well, what I can tell you," and then I went ahead and said the same thing I'd said the first 3 times. So, I think I totally get the pressure and the deadlines and all of that, but we are under similar pressure if you're on the corporate communication side, because if it's a big enough story, you've got multiple media outlets calling you and everybody wants you to talk to them. And so, it's not unlike what a reporter is experiencing when it's a big story that's getting a lot of attention. So, I guess again, my thing is, keep an open mind. Don't come in with your preconceived notions. Now, of course, as a reporter, you've got your spidey senses, you've got instincts, you've got all these things that
Mm-hmm.
make you a good reporter, but don't let
Mm-hmm.
that get in the way of the actual facts. I had a reporter once call me and ask me why the company was using, and she gave a description of a piece of equipment that she saw, and she was completely wrong about what the equipment was, the material, but she was the point she was trying to make was that substandard equipment was being used on a particular job, but she had no idea what that equipment was. It looked very much like something that you could see just anywhere, and she made the assumption that it was exactly what she's seen before, and it was nothing like that. It just happened to look that way. So rather than come to me and say, "Why are you using, this flimsy yada yada yada?" Ask me, what are you using to do this work? Can you, and I could explain it to her. When I actually explained it to her in great detail so that she would understand that it was not what she thought it was. And this was, we were going back through text messaging. She did not respond back. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't say thank you. And I don't think the story ever ran because it was no longer the story about this substandard equipment that she thought was being used. It didn't fit the narrative. So, that's always been a concern for me, that corporate spokespeople can be seen as, just a company mouthpiece who's just going to say what the company wants them to say. Well, yeah, I'm going to say what has been approved for me to say, but I'm also not going to lie. I'm also not going to mislead. And there are times when I will push back hard on the lawyers, on the senior executives, on the folks who either don't want us to say anything or want us to say something in a particular way, because I understand at the end of the day, it's usually a story that has some impact on a person or person's lives. And so I want to be honest and, upfront about that. So yeah, I would just want reporters to come into a story with as open mind as possible.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences as a corporate spokesperson with the media, having already come in with the narrative that they just want to plug and play with. And, I've also been a government spokesperson, public information officer, and, there's all kinds of rules around, requests for Freedom of Information Act information and all kinds of rules around that. And I've had reporters really push the boundaries on, why can't I get access to this information? And, and there's just so many nuances around that. And I always believed in, that freedom of information, and that if there's information that is really public information, we should be sharing it, and we shouldn't be, hiding anything. But there was some cases where, especially if it was sort of high profile, that you can't share certain things, and but it's funny because certain reporters would find a way to get that information, right? And so that always kind of drove me a little nuts, is, they have multiple sources. And so like, for example, this one document, it was a police document that had been submitted to our agency. That, okay, so the agency person wouldn't release it, but somehow somebody from the police department did, right? And so, that's always something that's kind of out there, right?
And I'm not going to ever fault a reporter for doing their due diligence, going to multiple
Mm-hmm.
sources to find the information they're seeking. That's what they're supposed to do. I did it when I was a reporter. But what I would like them to understand and appreciate is that there are things that I, as an individual, and even, certainly after working through the process internally, can't just release because you want it. And
Correct.
if you go through the process, if you get it from somebody else, that's fine. If it's whatever the document is, 9 times out of 10, we know what it is, we know what's in it, and so we would still be
Mm-hmm.
prepared to respond if we had to. But I, particularly early on in my career in corporate communications, when many of the people I worked alongside as a reporter were still out there covering stories, they would sometimes ask me, or they would say things to suggest that I could be their unnamed source. They had this idea that because I was a former reporter and I knew what they were up against, what they were looking for, that I was just going to risk my job and give them information that I was not authorized to give them. And eventually they learned that I'm not going to do that, but I'm also not going to be one of those corporate spokespeople who doesn't understand the media, who doesn't want to respond, and who you know, doesn't care about the relationship that I have with them, because I absolutely did care. And there were many reporters who would say to me, you're the only one in terms of organizations out there who actually shows up and who actually talks to us. The other ones, they'll send a statement. Maybe they may not even do that. And so I did have a good relationship with them, but it was interesting how in the beginning, some of them thought that my reporter instincts were going to overtake my, my desire to do well in the corporate communication space.
Yeah, yeah, that's unfortunate that they thought that. But they're just trying to get their
Right.
story. Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think because you were in their shoes, that made you a better corporate spokesperson than someone who had never been in those shoes, because unless you understand the pressure of the deadlines and what they're up against, it is really hard to just learn that if
Mm-hmm.
like you just kind of grow up through corporate communications and you're representing the organization. And I do think that, you know, um, that benefits organizations when they do hire former reporters because of that knowledge and that sort of like come from, like
Yeah.
you understand the environment that they're working in. So you're going to respond a little bit differently than someone who has never worked
Mm-hmm.
in a news organization or in a newsroom, or whether it's TV or it's radio or it's newspaper or magazine, like whatever it is, and just understand how the content kind of comes to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And gets produced and how you're evaluated with the ratings and things of that nature. So,
Yeah.
um, tell me a little bit more about like, so it was after I really had worked with you that you transitioned into more of a government relations role, where you were sort of the face of the organization with sort of the politicians and things like that. Like, how is that like? I mean, it's to me, it's like a natural extension, right? It's just a different stakeholder group. But like, how is that like transition?
It was a really good opportunity. It came at a time where I think I'd been with the company 10 or 11 years in the communication space and really wanted to do something else, but not really sure where. When you're in an organization that's there's a lot of engineers, there are a lot of areas where I wouldn't have fit in. But the government relations, and I think at the time we called it external affairs, but it's government relations. That was an area where I felt I could do well in. For one thing, many of the stories that became media stories had some government component to it, and it could have even just been something like a big storm, and you've got hundreds of thousands of customers out of power. Well, all of the local officials want their jurisdiction to get their service back. So they're going to be part of, they've got their own things that they want to say. We're going to talk about, what we're working to get, how we're working to get people's power back. And so many times the events or the things that became newsworthy involved the company as well as some form of government, whether it was the state or one of the local jurisdictions. And so I interacted with a number. And so just to back up a little bit, when I got that role, my primary territory was Baltimore City. Born and raised in Baltimore, so that was great. Knew a lot of the elected officials, either just because I've been here for a long time as a reporter, and they knew of me even if they didn't really know me. So I wasn't completely unfamiliar to them. So we sort of didn't have to really start from the ground up to build those relationships. And so, one of the things I quickly learned, though, in terms of the difference between being the sort of relationship manager between the company and elected officials, as opposed to the relationship manager between the company and the media, is when you're talking to the media, you're talking big picture. You're talking about the whole system. You're talking about what the company is doing all across, in this case, Central Maryland. When you're talking to elected officials, they only care about their jurisdiction. And so you have to be very careful to be honest and upfront with them, but you also don't want to sound like you are um, favoring them over another jurisdiction, because there's a person just like me the same role who's the company's representative for another jurisdiction. So I had to find out how to do that, and I'll tell you, I learned very quickly. I moved into that role in 2012, and the person who had been in the role had been in it for like 30 years or something. So he'd had
Right.
all these relationships and just knew everybody everywhere. And I kind of shadowed him for a week or so before he left, but he's gone on a Friday, and Saturday morning I get a call. And I don't know if this will be familiar. It'll probably be familiar to you, but we had this storm that no one had ever heard of, a derecho. I'd never heard
I
of it.
remember that. Yeah. I'd never heard of a derecho either. I'm like, what the heck is that?
It was this one straight line storm that nobody saw coming, that all of a sudden we had like 700,000 customers out. And so it's Saturday morning. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning, my first day on the job. And I get a call that I have to go to the city's emergency operations center. I wasn't even sure where it was yet because I'd never had to go there. And there are actually two, which I quickly found out, and they were at the one, thankfully, that was closest to where I lived at the time. Um, and so, but I learned very quickly that the way I was communicating with them in the beginning about sort of what we were doing, big picture, was not resonating. They didn't care what we were doing in Baltimore County and Howard County. They wanted to know, sometimes down to the street, what
Right.
we're doing and when we're doing it and when these customers are going to be have their service restored. So that was definitely one of those sink or swim moments. And then a couple months after that, we had Superstorm Sandy. So it was a great start to that new role. But with Superstorm Sandy, it was a hurricane that we saw approaching, and so there was much more that we could do in advance of that storm, and the impact was not as severe as it was for the derecho. So to answer your question, you're still managing relationships. You just have to realize that you've got to be much more narrowly focused when you're talking to elected officials. And sometimes it's not just the mayor who wants to know about what you're doing for the city, for whatever jurisdiction they represent, but sometimes it's also the council person who has a subset of the whole city. And so you just have to really be careful about how you manage that, because what I never wanted was for somebody to come to me and say, you told this person this and you told me that, and like, which one is it? I never wanted to have anybody question whether I was giving them factual information.
Right, right. No, I think, it's funny because like the through line of everything that you've been talking about is building relationships and how important it is to have that emotional intelligence to be able to build those relationships, right? And the give and take that happens in building relationships and how that can contribute to your success. If like you make them successful, then they'll help you be successful, right? And so recognizing sort of like what kind of you know, is important to them, like as an elected official, it's votes, right? And it's the perception of the constituents and it's, the impact it's going to have on the constituents because they've been elected to represent them and they're going to, fight for their rights and things like that. So I would agree. I think it's really about those relationships. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is I think you after sometime you got into improv and I want to know a little bit more about that and like what made you think about doing that, or did you get roped into it by someone, or like how did that all go down?
So I retired in 2023, and a couple of things just kind of emerged as opportunities that I could never have foreseen. So one of them was a former columnist, now former columnist for the Baltimore Sun, Dan Rodericks, who'd written at that time two plays. I'd heard about the first one. I hadn't gotten a chance to see it because they sold out and I never got tickets. So I knew it was out there, but I'd never seen it myself. So he reaches out to me maybe a month or two into the 2024 and asks me if I want to be in his second play, which I thought, well, that's weird because I'm not an actress. And I hadn't worked with Dan since, I guess, the 90s. He had a show on WBAL, a talk show, evening talk show, and I was the evening news anchor. So that was when we worked together. other than that, and that was, I don't even know, 5 or 6 years maybe, we were Facebook friends. We didn't really see or talk to each other on a regular basis. So I just thought, this is so random, but it also seemed really interesting. So I said, sure, if you think I can do it, yeah, I'll do it. So that started, and that was a whole sort of separate thing. But I also knew that I wanted to take some classes at the community college. I just thought this will be fun. This is the time to do it. I'm retired. And as I'm looking through the catalog for that, I guess it was the spring or at some point early part of 2024, I saw this improv class and I thought, well, since I'm not an actress and Dan's got me in this play and I don't know what I'm doing. And some of the people in the play are actual actors, trained and professionals, and others who were not trained professionals had been in his previous play. So they had much up on me. My last play was in 1982 when I was in high school. And I was in the chorus of Grease. That was it. So I'm thinking I need some help and I need some help fast. So I signed up for the improv class, and it was taught by a gentleman who had done improv in Philly for a number of years. I live in Harford County. He lives in Harford County, and there is no improv group in Harford County. So he was this course was kind of his way of trying to get that started. And so what I thought it would do for me was, everything that I did in corporate communications and to a large extent as a reporter was to some degree rehearsed. I wasn't reading a script. I knew my talking points. I knew what I was going to say. So it was prepared in some way. So I just thought this would be a great opportunity to be, to learn how to be more sort of speaking sort of on my feet and just off the cuff and making it make sense. If it needs to make sense. I did learn that improv, it never has to make sense. So I just thought it would be a fun exercise for my brain. It would get my brain to think in a way that it didn't think before, and to, just kind of figure it out. So I took I think the classes were, can't remember if they were 6 weeks or 8 weeks, but I did 2 sessions, and some of the people had done it before. Again, they were really good. I am I'm not a shy person, but I'm not the type of person. I don't think I'm particularly funny. I don't think I can just like stand up and just start talking to people and have people cracking up. Some of the people in this class were just naturally funny people, and they would come up with stuff, and I would just sit there like, how did that even come out of his mouth? So for me, it was just an opportunity to exercise a part of my brain that probably had not been exercised. It was fun. I was never super comfortable with it, which again is how you grow. So I kind of forced myself to do it. And we did one show, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I didn't do any more after the second session because I had other things going on. So but yeah, it was fun. And I just also it taught me how hard improv is. And I just admire people who can do it and who do it well and who do it consistently. It's a beautiful thing if you can do it. So yeah, that's how that got started.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And so what a great thing. So one of the other things I love about you is how you mentor and show up as Aunt Linda to Kelly. So tell the listeners a little bit about Kelly and your relationship with Kelly.
Okay, so I probably, because if my nieces and nephew ever see this, I probably should start with, I have 3 nieces and 1 nephew. Kelly is one of my nieces. Everyone else will probably say she is my favorite. I always say she's my favorite second niece because she has a sister who's older. She's my favorite first niece, and then she has a brother and sister who are twins. So I love them all. But yes, Kelly is definitely a unique individual. Kelly is 28 years old. She has Down syndrome, and she's just a hoot. I mean, we have a special relationship because I see her a lot. I am still on the board at the ARC
Oh, okay.
in Chesapeake. So that, which is an organization that works with adults with differing abilities. And so, through Kelly, I see the world differently. Kelly, um, she has a very strong and positive personality. And I take her to a day program that is organized by a local church, and it's just for special needs adults. So they come along with their coaches, and there are a lot of people there who have, I would say, more severe um, disabilities than Kelly. And so you kind of see the full range of what is out there in terms of people living with differing abilities. But yeah, Kelly is my niece. I've been close to all of my nieces and nephews ever since they were born. But Kelly is just one. She loves to dance, and so there's the Ark has a gala, and there are different events that wherever we go, if dancing is involved, Kelly will cut the rug. And so I just usually just sit back and take pictures because I can't keep up. But she's being with her gives me a different appreciation for life and life in general, because she's almost always happy. She doesn't follow the news, and she doesn't, there's a lot that she doesn't know about sort of the world, but she has very good just sort of instincts. She can tell if a person is kind of her type of person or not. The things that we may think and want to say, you don't have to wonder what Kelly's thinking, because she's going to say it. She's going to tell you. And so I just appreciate that she's so just she's funny, she's free, she's not sort of encumbered by all of the sort of the things that society tells us we have to do, we have to be, we have to say. And sometimes it drives me crazy because when she won't take her nail polish off that's been on for 3 months, and it's like down to like just a little bit, but she still likes it. That drives me up a wall, because Kelly, you need to get your nails done. But with her, she's like, no, it's fine, I like it this way. Or she has this one outfit that she was always going to wear every Thursday when we would go to this group, and I would say to her, Kelly, could you please wear something else? No, I'm going to wear this. And you just have to let expectations go and just let her kind of do her thing. So yeah, she is a bright light in our family, and just very, very oh, I don't even know, bubbly. And I'll tell you just a quick story. So she is considered handicapped, and so when she goes out with her family, if it's an amusement park or whatever the thing is, they can get handicap parking, and she's a little on the heavy side, and so she doesn't like to do a lot of walking and whatnot. And so I took the two nieces and a nephew to a baseball game not long ago, and I don't have a handicap placard or anything, but I know how she gets when we have to walk, and it's tiresome. She takes forever, and it's a problem. So I asked if we could park there, and they said they could see her, and they could see that she looks like a person with Down syndrome. And so they said, well, you need to go over there and ask, and they may let you park there. And so I did, but she kept hearing, and they allowed us to park there, but she kept hearing handicapped, and my niece is handicapped. And at some point she was sitting in the back of the car, and she said, could you please stop saying I'm handicapped? I am not handicapped. And I just thought, well, okay, but you kind of are, and you're the one who's going to have the problem when it comes to walking this long distance, and I'm trying to do this for you. And so she sees herself as she should, as like anybody else in this country,
Mm-hmm.
in the world, who is living their best life. But yeah, so that's my sweet niece Kelly. She's a
I love, 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 love. And yeah, you're close to all of them. And I've known about all of them, but I love that she gives you that different perspective.
yeah.
Because I think it's really important to keep all of us grounded, right? And I would say she not only cuts up the rug, she takes over the dance floor. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's just you just because you can't compete, so you just have to sit there and watch. Or if there are times when I'll try to dance with her, or even there have been times at the dance that we go to at the church where some of her peers will come over and dance with her, and she will do some kind of spin move or something where you think you're still dancing with her, and you look up and she's on the other side of the room. And she did that move on purpose to get away from you, because she needs all the space. So yeah, she's a lot of fun, and we enjoy hanging out together. She's
Yeah.
probably texting me now because she's texting me all day long. So
Right, right. Well, I'm sure you're her favorite aunt. So my
I am.
finale
They
question,
don't have one, so I am
yeah.
the.
It's all good, Linda. So my finale question is always, what's the bravest thing that you've ever done, and how does it inspire you today? And I know that you took a leap of faith and went to LA, and that could be it. But when you really think about, sort of like taking a leap of faith, being courageous, kind of, what really comes to mind for you?
Well, that probably in my estimation is the bravest thing I've ever done. Because I left a well-paying, steady job to move to a place where the cost of living was much higher, where I didn't have a job. I had a commitment to get work, but I didn't have a job. And then with all the
Hmm.
stuff with 9/11 and just the way things went down when I got there, but it so I feel like that's probably the bravest. But since I've already gone through that story, I think wow, that's it's really tough. I'll say one of the more recent and professional brave things that I've done is most of my career in corporate communications was with the utility, Baltimore Gas and Electric, and I was there for 20 years. And then in 2022, I think, into 21, somewhere around there, there was a whole corporate separation and a bunch of stuff happened. And I was offered a promotion, but it was going to be with the company that was being spun off. So I was leaving the utility world and moving over to a different, an energy company, but a very different energy company than what I was used to. And that also happened while we were still working remotely, and I was going to be with new people in a different building. When we went in, I was in a different building, but um, it was exciting, and it was also um very stressful because I felt like I knew the utility like the back of my hand. I knew all the people, I knew where the buildings were, I knew, everything. And being a public utility, it was based in Central Maryland, so everything was more or less in Central Maryland. I move over to this other company, and first of all, it's starting almost, it's not a startup per se, but it's been spun off from the bigger company, and it's starting to do things differently. And I've got to learn who the people are. It's a nationwide company, and so we have offices in all over the country. We have power plants, we have all kinds of stuff. And I was sort of nearing the end of my career. I was in my late 50s at the time, and it was very challenging because there were so many moving parts all the time, and it was
Hmm.
a new company and sort of trying to reinvent itself. And I didn't always know who the people were, who I needed to talk to. I could find out if I didn't know who I needed to talk to. I could talk to somebody who could talk to somebody. Eventually, I'd figure it out. But also
Right.
because we were working remotely, even when I would go into the office, a lot of times there weren't people there because even my own team, the communications team, we were all in different places. The folks who reported to me were based in Pennsylvania. My boss was in Pennsylvania. His boss was in Chicago, and there were other people in New York. So it was just a much different organization. And so learning that company, and it's what do they you often hear people say it's like flying a what do you build.
Building the plane as you're flying it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
hate the
Yeah.
expression, but that's what it felt like. So yeah, that was definitely I would say courageous, because I could have stayed at the utility had I chosen to, but this was an opportunity to do something different, to learn something, and I
Hmm.
definitely learned a lot that I would not have learned over on the utility side. Made some new relationships. I'm still in touch with a number of the people who I only really worked with for about 2 years. Some of them I knew,
Hmm.
just because we had been part of the same corporation, but had not worked with them. So that was definitely a courageous thing, and one that I'm really grateful for because I learned a lot, and it keeps it interesting. I've always said that um, the measurement for me when it's either time to move to a different role, and in, my last case, time to retire, was if I'm not having fun anymore, if I'm either not having fun or I don't feel like I'm making an impact, or I feel like I ought to be doing something else. And so, that was definitely, I'm so grateful that was kind of my last stop on the corporate communications ladder, because it was a wonderful learning experience. I built new relationships, and
Right.
just it worked out really well.
Right, right. Well, I just want to say thank you for joining the show, sharing your wisdom, talking about being a journalist, sharing all your fun stories. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners in terms of how to get in touch with you, what you're interested in doing next, or what you're doing now, or anything of that nature?
Well, I am running a very small consulting firm. And I say very small because I decided when I retired that I never wanted to work as hard, or be as stressed as I was during what amounted to 37 years of either combined reporter and corporate communications. And so it is very small. Right now, interestingly, I am working with authors. In one case, I worked with an author to launch, who'd written her second book, and we launched that actually about a year ago in July of last year. And now I'm working with another writer who we're still trying to find a publisher for her, but we're actually still going through the editing process. So more to
Hmm.
come on that once we're kind of ready to share. But I do writing. I have friends who have their own communications companies, and I can write press releases for them. I do corporate, speeches, executive talking points, all of those things. And again, I'm just very, very careful about the work that I choose, because I want to enjoy life in retirement. I want to still be active, and I still want, my brain and those brain cells that did all that work for 37 years. I don't want them to just, fall away and go dormant, but I
Right.
want to enjoy myself. So to reach me is Linda at lindafoyconsulting.com. And I am also on LinkedIn, Linda Foy. If you search Linda Foy, it should come up. And those are probably the fastest ways to reach me. If I don't respond right away, no worries. I don't check LinkedIn every single day anymore. I do try to check my emails every day. So that's it.
Great, great. Well, we'll make sure that we share all that in the show notes. And again, I just wish you nothing but the best in retirement, doing the work that you choose to do, honestly. And I love that you are such a learner and that you're in this season of life. I mean, being a reporter and being in CorpCom, you're 24/7, 365. So, yes, you deserve a break all the time.
I appreciate it. And I will tell you, I'd probably been retired for 6 months, and I was still getting media calls sometimes. And I was just like, really, people. And I sent them, I sent, everybody knew, like, it wasn't like I retired and didn't tell anybody, but
Right, 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 right.
numbers in their phone, they're going to call you because that's what they think of, which was also, I was somewhat proud of that, because they knew I was the person to contact. So yes, new phase, but still active and enjoying, what life has to offer.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M. I hope you found a gem or two that will motivate you to change your mindset, pursue your dreams, and fulfill your soul's purpose. I believe that we can go farther and faster when we connect in the spirit of positivity and understand how we individually can serve humanity. The world needs more love, so keep shining, ladies. I can be found on my corner of the interwebs at tracym.com, and I'd love to connect on social. Just Google me and my SEO will tell you more about what I'm up to as I step into my purpose as a storyteller. I love you, brave girls. Now, it's time for you to step up your game and become the best possible version of you. I believe in you, and you've got this.